We did our project on traditional Native American environmental sustainability practices.
We chose this topic because we're both environmental science majors and we're both looking to pursue careers in the field after graduation. We feel that learning and acknowledging diverse methods of environmental sustainability is important, especially for professionals in the field, because they're the ones that have the ability to implement these diverse approaches into modern sustainability efforts and they can execute them properly.
What sparked our interest further was our class reading The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. She has various scenes and dialogue between characters that sparks discussion of sustainability and the ceremonial aspects of living off the land. In one part, the main character Frenchie sees a moose while hunting. At this moment in the book, him and his tribe are starving, so Frenchie is excited at first, but realizes half the body would go to waste, so he spares the life of the moose. In another part, the characters are acknowledging the current state of the earth and saying how once the land heals, they will also heal, showing their connection with nature. Another part takes place after a hunting scene, where a ceremony is prepared to honor the life of a buck that was hunted.
Native tribes follow a fundamental understanding that all parts of an ecosystem are connected. And with this, they ensure to treat nature with respect and admiration, something that is often ignored in modern cultures. Having respect for the earth and possessing a stewardship mindset or the belief that humans are responsible for the world and taking care of it is especially important within Native communities. Relying solely on what the land freely provides, tribes comprehend that all fragments of nature, including themselves, are dependent upon and responsible for each other for survival, and that relationship must be honored accordingly.
Hunting and fishing are necessary practices when living from the land. To be sure that their hunting wasn't hurting the environment, natives developed specific practices to follow with aspirations to harm the ecosystem as little as possible. For example, tribes typically hunt deer in the fall after birthing season to aid in population stabilization. They were also extremely considerate by using every part of the animal harvest for food, tools, clothing, bedding, shelter, or decoration. Hunting arrows were carefully marked to determine the order of possession for fragments of the animal harvest. Typically, the hunter who killed the animal receives the greatest portion of meat, while the rest is distributed amongst the tribe. The tribes also take care to give thanks and respect to the animals for contributing their lives. In fact, following the fall hunting season, tribes will sometimes offer gifts to the spirit of the harvest animals as part of a ceremonial dance. Native tribes are also known for developing symbiotic relationships with wildlife so their ecosystem can benefit from their presence and as the tribe benefits from the land. A common example of this is the cleaning of streams and transporting salmon eggs when beneficial to the species. This practice promotes salmon repopulation, helping the species thrive while also providing themselves with ample food security.
Foraging is another method of food harvest that natives employ. In fact, the Iroquois people, which consists of 5 native tribes, have recorded foraging over 80 wild foods. They're careful not to overpick plants to make sure that there is enough left over to reproduce and grow for later generations to harvest. Bark was commonly harvested for fuel, shelter, and tools, and when harvesting, natives were careful to only take what was necessary so as to not kill the tree in the process. Celebrational ceremonies were often held following the harvest to honor the collection.
Practicing self-restraint benefits a communal society and by preventing overconsumption, which leaves resources for generations to come. The Iroquois Confederacy followed a self-prescribed philosophy called the seventh generation. This mandates that tribal decision makers consider the effects of their actions and decisions for descendants 7 generations into the future. This also takes into account that the environmental relationships affect the quality of our lives in future generations. They would harvest up to a third of their crops, then allow the rest to grow and reproduce. Pacific Northwest tribes utilized fish wheels to gather fish efficiency. Once enough fish were obtained, the fish wheels would be removed to encourage spawning upstream and reduce risk of depletion.
Native Americans had successfully developed efficient agricultural practices long before Western colonization. In fact, the Cherokee people specifically raised a minimum of 15 varieties of maize before European settlement occurred. The Wampanoag tribe was responsible for keeping the Pilgrims alive for the first year of colonization by teaching them organic farming strategies they developed, including the utilization of wood ashes and fish remains to organically fertilize soils. This method of soil fertilization increases nitrogen and nutrient material, which in turn promotes crop growth. The lack of heavy machinery and plows also aided increasing soil fertility. The Iroquois people designed and followed the Three Sisters ideology, which consisted of growing maize, beans, and squash in the same vicinity to encourage optimal growing conditions for each of the species. So the corn stalks act as a trellis structure for the beans to grow up, while the beans promote nitrogen fixation within the soil, leading to high nitrogen levels, which is a characteristic necessary for corn to grow. The squash plants grow their leaves low and wide around the corn and bean plants, covering the surrounding ground to prevent weed growth and evaporation from the soil, which in turn promotes soil moisture. However, tribes in different parts of the country had to develop contrasting agricultural practices to coincide with the varying environmental conditions that occur throughout the country. The Hopi tribe, in particular, specialized in dryland farming for intolerable climates. This includes methods like planting seeds deeper in the soil, minimal use of irrigation, and growing specific species tolerant of dry environmental conditions, such as tapari beans.
Coastal indigenous groups planting marsh grasses and trees within coastal marshlands utilize for breeding grounds by fish and crustaceans in order to promote a natural life cycle where aquatic species can thrive. During the late 1800s, European settlers slaughtered tens of millions of bison just to spite Native Americans, who saw bison as important spiritually. Below on the left, we can see an image showing a large pile of bison skulls. Originally, there were 20 to 30 million bison, but after the slaughter, only 23 remained, which only happened by accident, where if settlers knew those bison were still alive, they would have killed them too. The Assiniboine and Sioux tribes of Fort Peck in Montana have put in legislation to have wild bison transported to their reservation in order to support their growing population with their conservation program.
The harvesting of timber is a common practice within Native American communities, but the way they go about harvesting timber is largely unconventional in terms of environmental practices. Menominee Chief Oshkosh developed an unorthodox strategy for timber harvesting, where he advises to start with the rising sun and work towards the setting sun, but take only the mature trees, the sick trees, and the trees that have fallen. When you reach the end of the reservation, turn and cut from the setting sun to the rising sun, and the trees will last forever. Following this advice, the tribe was able to harvest 2.5 times the volume of the forest in 160 years, and the forest today has greater volume and higher quality timber than when the reservation was first established. This demonstrates an understanding of the life history of a forest ecosystem and how to manage it while still utilizing its resources.
Tribes use low-grade fires to shape the landscape and encourage specific fire-adapted species to grow. Controlled fires clear underbrush and promote early succession growth of vegetation. Natives began by harvesting branches to utilize for traditional basket weaving projects. After stripping the plants of useful branches, the plant is burned with the lighter, but kept the root stock intact to promote resprouting after spring rains. Native American tribes located in California would traditionally hold annual controlled burns. However, when settlers forcibly removed tribes from their land, controlled burning ceremonies disappeared. State and federal authorities then focused on getting rid of the fires, but fire suppression ultimately worsened the wildfire problem. Because without regular controlled burns, landscapes are able to grow thick with vegetation that dries out in the summer, causing the fires that have been destroying the communities of California. Here on the bottom, we see a real-life example of a controlled burn by the North Fork Mono tribe.
And these are our sources. Thank you.